Well, I'm sure as most of you may or may not know, the reason you're even coming and talking to me is because I was a teen mother. I was a mom at 15. My daughter is now a sophomore in college, so that's been a few years ago. I found myself in a situation when I was a sophomore in high school where I'd made some bad decisions, and so I had to kind of figure out what I was going to do with that situation. My parents were disappointed, yes, to say the least, but were extremely supportive and helped me along the way. I would not be where I am today without their help. I think one of the questions you asked was options on whether I had considered adoption or abortion, or abortion was never an option, was not something that I ever thought about. You can deny a lot of things in those kind of situations, and I didn't admit to myself that I was even pregnant until I was about 5 months pregnant. And so really, abortion even at that time was not, they said, oh, if you're going to do that, you have to do it right away. Well, it was never even a thought. That was not something that I even considered. I did consider adoption for a while, looked into what it would take in families, and I had actually a couple of family members that were interested in adopting her. But as I continued with the pregnancy, I realized that it was not something that I could do. I could not let her go and be okay. So we went and, gosh, thinking back, we went and talked to a priest who very adamantly told me that I needed to give her up. And he sort of helped me make the decision, because he really made me face it. And I realized that at that point that was not something I could do. So, and that was probably 7 months pregnant, something like that. And so at that point we realized we were going to keep the baby. And again, my parents, I very distinctly remember my father, as we were talking about what we were going to do, saying, okay, you made one mistake, but we're not going to make another. So that right there, the abortion was not the option that we were considering, but his words to me rang true with me and have stuck with me after 19 years. I remember those words that he told me. So like I said, they were extremely, I can't even express how important they were for me to get through that situation. I couldn't imagine wondering how she was, what she was going to be doing. I knew that I had support from my family, and I felt that I could give her a good home, that I could raise her, it was just the right decision for me. That was a very tough time. I remember having a conversation with my mom about it before I actually admitted it, and she asked me straight out if I was pregnant, and I lied to her, as I really wanted to believe that I was not. You try and convince yourselves of things. And so it was probably a month or so, maybe 2 months after that I finally sort of came to the realization that yes, I really was. And so then I sat down and talked to my mom, and I just remember very silly saying, "Don't tell Dad," like I was going to hide it or something. But she said, "Okay, well, we'll deal with it." That was sort of the response, was we'll go get a test and make sure. But at that point, I really wasn't showing, so I just knew I didn't feel right, and I felt like I was getting bigger, and but no one else would ever have known at that point, because I just, you're a young girl, and that wasn't the issue. I just knew I didn't feel right and that something wasn't right. So again, the shock and disappointment, but we decided we're going to move on. We're going to do the best that we can with the situation. So it was very different. You know, overall it was pretty lucky because most of my friends were supportive of it. They were happy for me, but they didn't shun me. They didn't refuse to hang out with me or whatever. Most of the friends that I had before were still the friends that I had afterwards. My social life changed a bit. Once she was born, we didn't go out on Friday and Saturday night. I stayed home and was a mom. And so they would friends might come and stop by and watch a movie or hang out for a little bit, but it just wasn't that important to me to do at the time because I had other responsibilities. So it was just very different than probably the situation that other high school students had. Okay, well, one of the things that my parents and I discussed when I did get pregnant was that they were not going to be her parent. I was going to be her parent, and so it was going to be my responsibility to raise her. So before school, after school, at night, it was my responsibility. I mean, I was up in the middle of the nights, I was doing the feedings, I was changing the diapers, it was my responsibility. Not that they didn't help me. There were nights, I know, when Alyssa was up 3 or 4 times and my mom would come down and say, you want me to feed her this time, let you get a little bit of rest. So, I mean, they helped me out, but it was my job, it was my responsibility. My mom did give up her job at the time. She'd gone back to work a few years before, but she decided to give up her job so that she could babysit her during the day. And so I would get her up and get her ready because we grew up on a farm and they would be out milking cows. And so before I went to school, I had her up, ready, took her out to the barn so that they were taking care of her while I went to school. And then when school was over, I went home, with the exception of during volleyball season. They said, all right, we don't want you to miss out on everything in high school, so sort of their one exception was to let me pick a sport and play it, and so I chose volleyball, and that was sort of my one indulgence. And I think I have come to truly like that because I still do that now. So, but that was sort of the compromise we made, was that I was going to be their parent, and they were not going to be the babysitter for me all the time. And so when I wasn't at school, at work, she was my responsibility. So. I have thought about that a lot, and what you can do and what you can say to teenagers in that situation. And I think you need to do a lot of reflection when you are junior high age, young teens, and set those boundaries for what you will and you will not do. And it's really hard to make that decision when you are in a relationship with a young man or a young lady, and you think that you're in love, and you think that this is going to be it. And as a teenager, so much can happen, and when you have those feelings at that point, your judgment is clouded. And so I think you need to make that decision before you're ever in that relationship, or before you ever think that you're in love, and know, this is as far as I'm going to go. I'm not going to go any beyond this. I'm not going to be swayed by those feelings that this is really, this is love, and this is okay, and it's not going to happen to me, because it can happen to anybody. And so you have to make that decision what you're going to do before you're in that situation, and stick with it. I think I thought it wouldn't happen to me. I thought, you think that you're invincible and that it's okay, and just this once, or you just don't think that can happen. You just think that everything's going to be okay, and when things, you just think that it's not going to happen to you, and you just need to realize that it can. and then it does, and that there are consequences for it, and you have to be willing to live with those consequences if it does happen to you. I know that there were some people that said some not very nice things about me, and I'm sure at the time it hurt, you know, that it hurt my feelings and it bothered me, but you know, I had a good core group of friends that I trusted and that were good friends, that it was okay, you know. I'm sure with everybody, not everybody likes you when everything's normal and you're just a normal teenager. So, you know, really, I think people were shocked more than anything because I was not the typical student that this was supposed to happen to. You know, I was the straight-A student, I was the athlete, I was not the student that this was going to happen to. So, I think a lot of people were just shocked, and then as time went on, and I would bring Alyssa with me to events, and she was just part of who I was. Most people just accepted it and moved on with it, and it would just not that it wasn't a big deal, but it was not shunned by a lot of people. He was. We had split up before I knew that I was pregnant, and we had tried to get back together, and it wasn't meant to be. He was somewhat involved, and that got to be kind of hairy actually for a while. And then he went off to college and saw her less and less, and then he moved several states away, and so she didn't see a lot of him, but she still does have contact with him. For me, I met someone else, and we sort of became a family, and he kind of stepped in. My husband stepped in to sort of be her father, and but for my daughter, it was tough for him not to be around, for him not to be at all of her events, for him not to be, you know, at all the things that she does. I think it's probably similar to a divorce situation for a lot of kids that go through that, you know, having two dads or having one father that's not there and the stepdad really that's there. She still has contact with him, but it's very limited. I mean, they just don't have the kind of relationship that, you know, that they would talk on a regular basis. They still do communicate with each other some, and she goes to see him once in a while and vice versa. But it's just not like somebody that she grew up in the house with and is around him all the time. Because of it. You know, I don't know. It's such a different situation for him because he was not taking care of her day in and day out that I'm sure he had to give up some things. I know he had to get a job, you know, to help try and support her. But it's hard for me to answer that question, I guess, not being. I am most positive that it certainly turned some guys away, that they wouldn't want to have any part of it. But I think for me, if they got involved with me, they knew what they were getting, what they were signing up for. I mean, it was never a secret that I had her, and so I think it kind of eliminated maybe some that I would have maybe dated and then realized that they weren't who I wanted. So when I dated someone through high school, and he was okay with staying at home on the weekends and hanging out and just watching movies, that kind of thing, and she was around. And then when I went to college, and my husband, he was actually from my hometown, so he knew about her, and it didn't bother him, or it wasn't an issue, I guess, for him. So in college, I was definitely a non-traditional student. So as I was going to classes and they were talking about, you know, what they were going to be doing for the weekend and where they were going and where they were hanging out at, it just wasn't the same things that I was doing. So I guess I would say my college experience would be like an adult going to college. You know, if you're older and you go back to college, that was more of what my experience was, because I didn't live in the dorms. We lived, when I went to college, I took her with me, and we lived in an apartment off of campus, because the college I went to didn't offer, you know, family housing, anything like that. So, you know, we didn't have the dorm life, we didn't have the going out on the weekends. It was just a very different experience. But I don't necessarily feel like I missed out on anything. I feel like that what happened led me down the path that I went. You know, I think because of it, it didn't take long for her to start, you know, for friends to start realizing that her mom was awfully young compared to some of their moms. And so really I think what it did was it opened up a line of communication about pregnancy and the whole situation. And so it was never a taboo subject in our house. It was something that we talked about. It was something that we discussed. And my goal was to get her through high school into college. And you know, the likelihood that she would become a teen mother goes up dramatically when you are a product of a teen mom. And so my goal was really to get her out of high school, to get her through, and for her not to be in the same situation. And she's in college and everything's wonderful. So I think in that aspect it just opened up lines of communication for us that maybe we would have shied away from before. I think it's similar to being a child of divorced parents. That's what I think for her it was probably most similar to. There were definitely times where she had issues with it, and you know, would question why one wasn't there or why she had two. And but I think as she's gotten older, she kind of has figured it out and deals with it the best way that I think anybody in that situation can. I think the advice is to really do a lot of reflection and think about what would you do in that situation before you're in a relationship, before you're in love. Make that decision on what you are and what you are not going to do, and realize there's consequences for everything that you do, no matter what. Whether you get caught or not, or whether you become pregnant or not, there's other consequences, there's other emotions, there's other things that go along with it, and you need to make sure that you are ready for all of that before you make that decision. And do that before you're in the relationship, not when you're in the middle of it.